Hello and welcome to the 5th video on how to play the bassoon. We have some exciting stuff planned for today, so I hope you guys are excited. We are going to be introducing the Etude, that is basically the culmination of everything we've done so far. And I know this isn't the last video, so what we're actually going to end up doing is we're going to introduce some more topics next time, and then we're going to revisit this Etude in the last video and turn it into that beautiful piece of bassoon music you and me, we know it can be. Alright, so with that said, let's get into this Etude. So, before we do anything, when we approach an Etude, there are a few things we want to ask ourselves before we start. Now, number one is, of course, what's the key? So for us here, we have the key of F major. Now, the second thing you need to ask yourself is, what is the time signature? We have 3/8. So we know that there will be 3 beats per measure, and that each beat, or each eighth note, will get the beat. Now, the last thing is, well, what speed should we play it at? So we have two different tempo markings here. We have allegretto and we have tempo di minuetto. So allegretto just means fast-ish, gretto-ish, and then tempo di minuetto just means the speed of a minuet, basically. So this is going to have a very dance-like feel, and we're going to probably feel this in like measures, like pardon my terrible singing. This is actually a little out of my range, but in any case, besides the point, once we know those 3 things, we are basically good to start looking at what's actually on the page, but we need to know those 3 things before we do anything else. So now, let's take a look at the overall sort of theme of this Etude. So we can see that we have this reoccurring rhythm that happens a lot throughout the Etude, the ba-da-ba-ba-bum, ba-da-ba-ba-bum, ba-da-ba-ba-bum. And we can see that that happens over and over again throughout the Etude. So now, if we take a look at the overarching form, what we have is we have this A theme, and then we have a B theme. And that pretty much describes the entire Etude. We have an A theme and we have a B theme. Now, the A theme and the B theme are very similar to each other because they both share that rhythm. Ba-da-ba-ba-bum, ba-da-ba-ba-bum. Not only that, but they have even the second line of each theme is the same. What's different about them is that the second part of this Etude is actually in the minor form of the theme, so that it gives a little bit of interest there. So now that we have both everything we need to know to begin and we know the overarching theme, now I want to just really dive into the nitty-gritty and basically tell you guys everything you need to know to be able to play all of the notes on this page. I really like this Etude because it goes all the way from a low C, which is one of the lowest notes we've talked about, all the way up to that high F, which is the highest note we've talked about in this video series. So it really is just the perfect Etude to put everything we've learned together. So in this first measure, we start on our low F, and of course, we need to continue going through that process of, drop your jaw, open up your throat, and use a very relaxed embouchure to get that F to speak, like so. And we also have an articulation pattern here that we need to pay very close attention to. We have slur 2, staccato 2, accent 1. So what slurring means is that you will tongue the first note, but then you'll just change your fingers for the rest of the notes, and you won't retongue, and you won't stop your breath either. You'll just keep that support going and keep blowing through the horn until you reach the end of the slur, which is everything under that curved line. Next we have staccatos. Staccato means separated, so we're going to play those notes very... there will be some space in between them, like this. The opposite of staccato is, of course, legato, so that would sound something like this. But we're playing them staccato. And then we finally end on that accented A. So for that accent, we're just going to give it a little weight with our air. We're going to use a little bit of extra air just to give that front end of the note a little bit of lift. And of course, that A needs to be vented. So you can apply these ideas to this whole line, especially with the staccatos and the accents. And especially with that low C, you really want to be able to get that note to speak whenever you want it. The next thing is that really high F. we need to make sure that we are really engaging our core and supporting that note so that it speaks properly. Now, that isn't to say that we want to play it super loudly, we just want to play it with support. So for example, there's a difference between so if you noticed, although the first F that I played was very loud, it still cracked. And although the second F I played was very soft, it came right out. And that is because support and volume are actually not linked. A lot of people assume they are, but this actually isn't the case. So we really want to just make sure that we're using support and not volume to get that F out. And then of course, same with the E that comes right after it. The next thing that we need to talk about is that G in measure 6. That G needs to be half-fold, which we have discussed briefly. So that means, again, in our first finger in our left hand, we're going to slide it down just a tiny bit so that hole is a little bit open, basically. It's half open, which is why we call it a half hole. And we're going to play the same fingering for G, but with that half hole so it comes out. So if we were to play this first line, it would sound a little something like this. Next, we have this piano F. So again, this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, that we really need to support it while also not raising our volume. So we really want to support to get that F out. So now this E, this F, E, F, E, F, E pattern, well, F and E are probably the two hardest notes that we've learned so far. But luckily for us, they only differ by one finger, and that is your right hand ring finger. So although if we were to play these notes on their own, it would be quite difficult, since they are right next to each other and it's just that one finger difference, it's actually pretty nice for us. So you can just really easily lift up and put down your third finger. Now, keep in mind that we do have this accidental, that B natural in this next measure. So be sure that we are paying attention to that. Other than that, I think that everything else on this line is pretty good. Of course, remembering that we need to vent everything and use support for those high notes. That's a little bit of a hard one. But I'm sure you guys can do it. With practice, of course. Now, if we move on to this next part, the B theme, we start on that E. So, what's interesting about this is in that A theme, we had a lot of ascending notes, but now we have a lot of descending notes. And what's very important to keep in mind is something that we talked about, I think in either the second or the third video, is that when we go lower on the bassoon, we actually need to physically pull the reed out of our mouth to aid us with those notes being able to speak. And that is especially true going all the way from an E, which will be pretty forward on the reed comparatively, that high E, all the way down to the low E, which will be pretty back. So throughout this short little passage, we'll actually be pulling the bassoon out of our mouth in order to get those notes to speak. So what I'm doing is basically once I reach the point where we no longer have any notes above open F, I'm at a very standard embouchure, and then I just continuously pull it out until I go all the way down to that low E. Next, of course, we have the G sharp, which also needs to be half-fold. So again, that's just really something we need to focus on. It's easy to forget to do the half-hole since the fingerings are so similar except for that one thing. So sometimes it just flies by and we're like, oh, it's you know, it's whatever. And then your muscle memory just forces you to play the regular fingering because that's what you're used to. But we really need to get that half-hole in there for good technique and so that note doesn't crack. Next, we have this very large jump all the way from a low C to an A. I think that's the largest jump in this etude, yeah. So for that, again, just really bring your lips back on the reed, open throat, lowered jaw to get that C out. And then basically immediately, you got to move your thumb to that vent key for the A and then bring the bassoon back further into your mouth. So in this passage, we do need to, it's a little difficult to keep changing that vent key for the B flat and the A. So what I personally do is, in a situation like this, I actually don't vent the A at all. Since we're already in that register, we're not really in any danger of it cracking, especially since we're slurring. So I really just vent the B flat and not the A's. So it's kind of like this motion. You press down both thumb keys and then you release both of them. So that's sort of what I'm doing there. Da, 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 da. And then of course we need that half-hole for that G. So we don't get something like this. It's that second time I played it, it went down the octave, so we really want to get that good half-hole in there. And then of course we have just more slurs all the way to the end, and I think that's basically it. Now, of course, there are these two repeats, so when we reach the end of the A theme, we're going to play it again. Likewise, when we reach the end of the B theme, we're going to play that again as well. However, that does it for our introduction of this etude. I hope you're as excited about learning how to play this as I am for you. It's going to be great. I can't wait. With that, I'll see you next time.